All right, we'll kind of get started here if everyone can kind of wrap it up here. My name is Kora, Dockter, and as Allison said, I am blessed to be the chair of this suicide prevention coalition. I am a nurse. My background is in nursing, and unfortunately I am, I guess, a wannabe survivor of suicide from the loss of our son. On February 21st, 2014, I ran into a curb when I was driving. And at that time, I was shaken and I had to collect myself. And I did not know what happened, but I knew in my heart something had happened. It went through my head that one of my parents had died. And I can't explain the feeling. There's just no words to explain that. It was until later, maybe an hour or so later, my husband called me and told me that our son had died. Based on his estimated time of death, the only thing I can link it to is it must have been the time that he crossed over, because he died prior to me running into that curb. So it was a horrible but an amazing experience. At that point, I had truly lost my baby boy. He was my firstborn. He's the one that made me a mom in the first place. And at that point, I joined a club, and that is mothers who have lost a child. And like that song, Hotel California, you can check out, but you can never leave. That is where you are for the rest of your life. Steve was married. He was 33. He had 3 beautiful children. He was a journeyman electrician at Tesoro with a strong work ethic. He loved animals, other though he had allergies to cats, which he didn't really care for, but he spent more years than I realized with severe depression. People with mental illness don't ask for it. They're not seeking attention. They don't want it. They just want to be better, and they want to live just like everybody else. This man who turned to suicide was in physical pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain. His pain was so excruciating, he would just say to me, he said, "Mom, it hurt so bad." So if anybody ever questions, is there a pain to mental illness? There truly is. We talked about God. He had such a strong faith, much stronger than mine could have ever been. And he walked the walk. He felt so alone in all this whole process. We had talked about it, and he didn't think God could help pull him through this, which was amazing and hard for me. He was definitely struggling just to survive. For him, suicide was not a choice that he made. It was a choice that he happened upon when his pain was greater than his ability to cope. This man, my son, who took his own life, was a survivor in every sense of the word. Everything we know about mental illness that we didn't know before, it being a chemical imbalance in the brain, it shocks and pains me that there is still such a stigma that exists, that we can't talk about it. We have heard from so many people since my husband and I, since the death of our son, people have opened up to us about suicides in their family and mental illness in their family. Before, it would not even have been mentioned. That's sad to me. The last 6 months of his life, I truly watched him die in front of my eyes. He had physical and mental health symptoms. He said his family would be better off without him. I would counter that back with, your girls need you there to walk you down the aisle. He felt another man would do a better job raising his own kids. Suicide does not discriminate, as we know. The year that he died, Robin Williams died, Nick Spaeth, who was in the politics in our state, and there was a police officer in Fargo, just to name a few. But that year, I noted those deaths. There's a word out there, and the word is Bielema, B-I-L-O-M-A-H, and that's the word for a parent who has lost a child, just like widow, widower, or orphan. Bielema is a Sanskrit word that literally means against the natural order. Sometimes you'll hear it said brown before gray, meaning a younger person over the older person. Sanskrit is a primary liturgical language of Hinduism, which is the ancient ritual of India. There's a lot of things that I've learned since my son's death. I've had to learn how to say how many kids that I have. When I'm brave, I say I have 3 kids, 1 that lives in heaven. When I'm not so brave and I'm vulnerable, I just say I have 3 kids. I never realized how painful a simple question could be. I learned how wonderful my son, a man of God, was. We heard so many stories of how he had helped his friends, helped his coworkers, and so it is because of that that I continue to speak for him today. One other thing that I learned through all this is Steve was afraid to talk to his employer about why he needed time off. I think it's time to end that stigma, to start asking ourselves if our HR departments, if our bosses are mental health friendly, where they will acknowledge that that needs time and that needs time off, and consider it as serious as other health issues. I also learned my daughters, my husband, his 3 girls, his wife, that we all grieve differently. My daughters, often they are asked how we are doing as parents. People forget to ask them how they're doing, and that was a whole different relationship that they had with that sibling that they grew up with, the one that they hid in the closet with, the one they played kick the can with. So please don't forget about those other survivors. This is something that I've had to learn the hard way, and I humbly ask you to please share this widely. It's very painful for survivors to hear this word. People commit crimes. They do not commit suicide. They die by suicide. They die from an illness. That is what actually killed them in the first place. I learned of something called a safety plan. It's a written plan for prevention. There's one in your packet. It's important, and I'll tell you why later in the day. Our experience with the healthcare system was, I don't know how to explain it. Care was not coordinated with family. Nobody educated us on how to care for our son. He got let out of the hospital after a short stay, and when I found out he was being discharged, I called the doctor, and I was told, quote, "The place is doing him more harm than good," end quote. What is wrong with this picture? Where do people go? Where do people get help? This man who I had to physically push, get behind him, and push his body from a lying to a sitting position the day before, all 6 feet of him, was good enough to go home the next day? It doesn't make sense to me. This is the same facility that my parents each have been in since that time. One broke a hip and the other had back surgery. We met with a social worker, found out what we needed to have available for them after surgery, after the hospitalization, or we met with a nurse care coordinator manager. There was none of that in this case. So I figured maybe Steve was just on the wrong floor. But unfortunately, I think that's the way things are going with mental health these days. At what point are those people with mental illness considered as fragile and as worthy as coordinated health care as all the other patients in that hospital? My son never went back. He died within 4 months, hopeless, helpless, and depressed. The hard thing for me is I had prayed to God a month before that. It was at this meal and after that visit with him that my prayer went to God to take his life. It was so painful to watch him. He was suffering, and there's nothing I could do about it. This was, by the way, for those of you that maybe do or don't like, but this was a lutefisk supper in January of 2014. So he was trying it, the kids weren't. But just like that song from Garth Brooks, Unanswered Prayers, I sure wish that would have been one of them. I could not save him, but I can tell his story. I can challenge this, I had challenged this man of God to get better and help others, because I know in his heart that's what he would have done. He was not able to do that. So in his memory, from my heart to yours, I honor that challenge and I pass it on to all of you. You may have noticed I use the word learned quite a bit. We know so much more than we did. The time for change is now. Let the conversations begin. It's truly time to start saving some lives. Thank you.